You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 73. Today I'll be talking to Alvaro Naddeo. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes complete with show notes at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Alvaro Naddeo. Alvaro creates highly detailed and richly textured watercolor paintings. And what many people may not know is that he's actually worked for more than 25 years in commercial advertising. And his art practice, his true love, is something he does on the side. We talk about how he fell back in love with art after 20 years in his advertising career and started giving a voice to his personal creativity. We also talk about the social commentary that his work often communicates, what he's been working on lately, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alvaro Naddeo. Alvaro, welcome to the show, man. It's so good to have you on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, so let's dive into your background a little bit. And I knew that you grew up in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So what was that area like? Were you like in the heart of the city? Was it a really urban environment when you were growing up?
Yes. I was born in São Paulo, but my family is from Uruguay. And it is interesting, and I think it has to do with my work because it is about inequality. Because I grew up, or I have like two phases of my life at very different environments. So the earliest part, when the memories that I have, the longest or earliest memories I have until I was 13, 14 years old, I lived in one part of the city in São Paulo, in a place that it was really, really, really near to a favela, which I know here, I think here we call like Slum City?
A slum?
Slum, yeah. So, yeah, I really like that. It was like super, super close to a really poor area. And it was because that area used to be like a kind of like normal suburbs. Then the municipality, they cleared one way because they were going to build a bigger avenue. They ended up not constructing that avenue. So then a lot of people built, took the land and built like really poor houses constructed with the, as we know, slum cities or those places. So I was super near to that kind of like environment, and it was strange to observe, or like for a kid. So I remember that I first started like seeing that like environment, but I don't remember any adults explaining to me what was going on. Why was so different? Like why like 2 blocks away is so different from here? And I probably never asked my parents, but nobody explained anything to me. I was just like introduced to this difference. Like there's like two, like it was like two very separate and distinct type of people. Like, and then later on, when I was a teenager, my dad, like he got a deal on a terrain in a very upscale part of the city, like a condominium, like where all the rich people in São Paulo at that time, at the 80s, they would go to live there because it was a gated community, So it's like the complete opposite. It's like many artists of the time used to live there, and though my dad, even though he wasn't rich, he got like a good deal on a terrain, and he slowly was able to build our house, like not him physically, but I know that just that he managed to he got a little money, and then he built a bit, and then he got a little extra money. So I'm just trying to say that even though he built our house at that very rich place, he wasn't rich, but he managed. Like it's fun. Like we were like middle class. And my first half of my life, I was really close to the poor, even though I wasn't that poor. And the second half of my teenage adult years, I was really close to the rich, and I wasn't rich. So I really think that has influenced me in a way that I was close and observed those, like being in the middle and observing like those two super different realities, and also understanding and seeing. I'm talking about when I was in the rich part, they had like no idea or like very very little compassion, or most of them.
So as you got older, did anybody ever explain that social inequality to you, to the point where you could, I guess, relate to those differences that you were seeing in your life?
I think that yes, when I started like getting older, then you're just starting like seeing the news and reading magazines, and it's all those observations or findings about myself. They findings about myself. They only happen like later in life. It wasn't like
Sure.
I get conscious about it and make those findings or assumptions later. Like when they are happening, I'm not aware of that they are happening. So no, I wasn't asking anybody what was going on, but I did remember that I was super interested in news and politics. I remember like asking my dad to subscribe for a newspaper when I was a teenager, because at our house he wasn't subscribed to any newspaper, and I asked him for one, and then I started like reading the newspaper every day.
And from what I understand, your father was an illustrator, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of illustration work did he do?
Yes, my father is an illustrator. So he's Uruguayan, and before I was born, he moved from Uruguay to Brazil because of work, because he could find more work in Brazil. And he did a lot of editorial. There is a company in Brazil that had many magazines, and he worked for many magazines. Like, for example, they had like the car magazine. They even had like they were the ones editing in the Playboy version of Brazil. It was the original. They had like the official Playboy, but Brazilian version. Actually, Playboy magazine is one of the magazines that my father worked the most. In the 80s, they had like for every magazine they have many articles, and most of the articles they were illustrated. They didn't like and I remember like those double pages of the article. Like most of the articles would start with a double page with a very nice illustration, and then get into the text. So he did that, and he did like some news magazine, weekly magazines. So he did a lot of magazines, which I remember he said it was good for exposure, but they didn't pay very well. And also he did some work for advertising agencies. Most of them, well, more than advertising agencies, maybe design agencies, because he used to do like illustrations for packaging or illustrations for material that goes on the point of purchase, like a poster. So yeah, like for example, like there's an ice cream, and he would make the strawberries that would go on the packaging of the like a hyper realistic illustration of strawberries for the packaging. Then later on, he would do like the whole ice cream for a poster,
Oh wow! And what kind of work did your mom do? Did anything creative?
Yes, my my mom, like when we were kids, she was a stay-at-home mom, and right now, like she for the last 20 years, she is a teacher and she has like a languages school, but I think she was also she's also creative, but she and my grandmother, maybe they would exercise their creativity by sewing, like or
Nice.
doing clothes. So yeah, I think so.
And so was that experience growing up with a professional illustrator, did that spark your own creativity at a young age, or how did you yourself become interested in making art?
Yes, I for sure I have to believe that that has a lot to do with who I am today. That old question of nature versus nurture
Right.
is super hard to me, because I think it's probably both, because I do think that people have some genetic thing that make it easier for them to do certain things, but I'm also super sure that you have to be incentivized, like that would be the nurture part. And then again, if you have those two things, if you have like the genetic part and you have the someone who has incentivized you, and then you go to like the hours and hours and hours of practice, then
Right.
this combo will go would result in something. But going back to your question, yes, it has to do with my creativity, because my dad had his studio at my house, at the house. So he was working there. Like we would go and if we were not bothering, like if like we usually go there in the studio and not like start like making noises or but we could go there and just like it was a room in our house. And I remember like going there all the time and just looking at him working at the table. Also, he had like many references, like in the 80s, obviously without Google, without computers. He used to have like his libraries, like he has like books, he has like magazines, and even like folders where he would clip, for example, bicycles, and he would clip bicycles, and he would, like so, and then sometimes he would like take a book and show it to me. I don't know. This is Frank Frazetta. This is Norman Rockwell. And then like I would there were piles of magazines, and I would get like the heavy metal magazine, which was obviously not for my age.
Right.
but he didn't care that much for that part about like being appropriate. But I also on heavy metal I remember like Moebius. I was like really into his work. So yes, I had all this visual experience, and also I remember like I would just sit at the floor and just paint, draw like stuff.
So was that something that they encouraged in you? Did they encourage that creative spark?
I think yes, but without forcing. Like my dad never told me, you have to do this, you gotta do this, you should do this, or you're good at this. But he would always like, if I asked how to do something, maybe he would teach me. So I think both of them being very like not trying to force anything, but allowing me and giving me, if I asked something that would help me in this creative path, they would give it to me, like in questions or materials, but not forcing or suggesting very much. So yeah, it was like nice.
Very cool. And from what I've read in your, I think it was in your bio, you mentioned that around the age of 17, so kind of late teenage years, you started to feel a little bit defeated because you compared yourself to this man that you watched your entire life growing up, and the difference between kind of the quality of work that your father was making versus what you were making, which honestly is not a very fair comparison. I mean, he's well into his career, has a lot of experience under his belt. You're just now, I mean, you're in your teenage years. So I guess tell me about that. Why did that affect you so much? And kind of caused you to move away from some of this artistic, creative pursuit that you were really enjoying.
Yes. This is also one of those things that I was mentioning to you, some realizations that come really like many years later, like probably 20 years later, that at the time I'm not aware that this is happening. I have zero idea, zero conscious idea. But like 20 years later, when I look back and I see, oh, that was what was happening. And I really believe that without knowing, I did that, what you just said, that it was like kind of compare what I was doing with what he was doing. And by being 17 or 18, I did not ask anybody about it, or I didn't like comment that. Especially I didn't know the role of practice on art. So I had no idea that it took like, it doesn't matter like if you have some in like some genetic predisposition, but if you don't practice it won't happen anything with it. So I think that I just assumed I wasn't good enough for illustration or painting or anything. But also that happens with like something going in parallel. That is, as I mentioned to you, my dad's studio was at home and he worked with magazines and agencies. And I was used to see the people who would visit him. So I was aware that there was also very creative people in these other places. Like you could be in an advertising agency and you could be creative. That was something that I also learned. And I think I thought to myself, oh, maybe I'm like those other adults that visit him, that they are also creative, they are cool, but they don't need to be drawing. You can be in this industry without being the person doing the painting or the drawings. And also, I think at that time in the 80s, like there was, at least in Brazil, there was an interesting phenomenon that it was like many the heads of the advertising agencies, they were like kind of like super known and stars in a way in Brazil. They were very celebrated. There was a lot of glamour around advertising agencies and creatives. And I thought it was easier for me to just work in an advertising agency. So I went and study marketing, which was the career that we would choose. It's advertising and marketing. It was the normal path, even though I think that for a creative, it teaches very little for a creative. At that time, there wasn't when I studied, there wasn't many other kinds of possibilities. Like for example, today there are like some like something like Miami Ed School or some other like schools that are a lot more focused just on creativity, and you just go and you learn how to be a creative, and you get out of there with a book, like a portfolio. So yes, that's more or less what happened. I didn't knew. I had to practice. I assumed I wasn't good for it, but I was also attracted. It wasn't like a sad decision. It was like, I was excited about like, oh, maybe advertising is for me. And it was for like 20, 30 years. It was like great.
So did you go to school for advertising? I mean, where did you go to school?
Yes.
You mentioned studying marketing. What did you go to university, college?
Yes, I went in Brazil to, at that time, it was like the best school for advertising, which is it's in ESPM, not like the channel ESPN. It's ESPM because it's propaganda and marketing, the last two words. So yes, it's a advertising and marketing school. It was like 4 years of studying, but that would be great for if you want to be like in the client side. If you want to be a manager of a brand, that's perfect for you. But if you are going to be a creative, you won't learn very much at that time. I'm talking when I studied, but it's not useless. Even though I when I was a creative and I had to learn how to be a creative by doing practices, by being an intern, it was that knowledge of how the client thinks. It was useful because I could talk to the client in his like language, because I knew what he studied and what he so it was useful information, but that's not how I got to be a creative.
Sure. Then I guess was your instruction more doing the work, like actually in the trenches doing the work where you learned it?
Yes, that's how I learned. Like one friend of my, one of those agencies, the one that was more like a design agency, who was the owner was really friends with my dad. He invited me to be an intern there, and yes, and that's where I learned everything. And curiously, it was also the same years where the computers were starting to be introduced to design agencies and advertising agencies. So I myself and the computers, we both arrived more or less in the same time at those agencies. And it was great for me because I got to learn like with them the part that they knew, but also got to learn with them the part that they didn't know, which was the computer softwares. So yes, I learned all the softwares there. I started with the Photoshop before. I think probably before the version 3. So just to have give you an idea, that Photoshop didn't have layers, so everything you did was just flat. Like you couldn't. But it was like it was a good time to learn all those tools.
What made you valuable, because all these people that were cutting pictures out of magazines, I mean, they were used to that, and you were coming in as this new blood, injecting this like new way of doing things.
Yes, exactly. I was like the link between two generations, because I remember what was going on at the agency with they still had the old art directors who wasn't like computer literate at that time. Many of them went on and learned later, and they had some computer operators. So they were like two categories. So what they used to do is like the art director would do on a rough, do a rough of the packaging is going to be like, it's going to be textures of leaves, and then the logo will be here, and he would draw on tracing paper, and he would give it to the computer guy, and the computer guy would translate that drawing into the software. And many times, like, they were like two categories of professionals, one with the creative and no computer knowledge, the other with computer knowledge and no creativity. And I in a way was the first generation that did both. Wow. I do remember. So that's how I started. Like I learned the softwares with them, with my friends, and then I started doing just that. When I was ready, software ready, I started doing like these translations. I would get the ideas from the art directors, and I would do put them on the software. And then one day, like for example, I started like at my lunchtime, I would just do my own creations. Like, so I did my part, I did my job, and on my free time, which was lunchtime, I would develop and create my alternative. And it was funny because like the first time one of those older guys, art directors, saw one of my creations, he said, "Oh shit, he's going to be an art director."
So they saw the potential in you. That's amazing. Yes, and I mean, since then, I mean, you've been in advertising for 25 or 30 years, like you said. Has it always been on the agency side of things? Has that always been your experience, is working in an agency?
Yes. I have been always like being an art director in a creative department. Yes. I went to like, as I was mentioning to you, I started in a design agency doing more like packaging and point of purchase. Then I moved to advertising, like TV, radio, magazines.
And at what point did you, because I believe you're living in the U.S. now, at what point did you make the move to the United States? Yeah,
that's like super weird path, because I went to Peru in 2003. I went to Peru. I always have dreamed of like living in New York or United States, but yeah, at the time it was something that was super like almost impossible, like get a visa, or you would get a tourist visa at the most. Like that was like what was reasonable to expect. But to get a working visa or a green card, it was almost like impossible. So I never pursued. I wished, but I never pursued because I couldn't even see a path on how to do it. So I just went on with my life, and I moved to Peru, and because of there was a crisis in Brazil, and I just got an opportunity in Peru, and I thought it was interesting adventure, and I thought I was going to do just for a couple of years while Brazil was in a crisis. I ended up like staying for a long time there, almost 8 years. But the thing is that I met some people like and I worked with people who ended up themselves working in an advertising agency in New York, and then they ended up like calling me and inviting me to work there. And and that's how I ended up like getting a work visa, working in New York, then doing all the path of green card, citizenship.
Nice. Very cool. And so all this time that you've been in the advertising world, have you enjoyed the commercial work that you've done throughout your career? Like, what's your favorite aspect of the commercial side of your job?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I really did enjoy. And I think there were some like really great years in advertising in general. Like the 90s, 2000 to me, they were great. What I enjoyed about it was because it allowed us to have a vision, like for example for a TV spot, and then someone would pay, I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of dollars to execute that idea, and you could see like come to life. So in a way, it was someone like obviously in a context that you are not just creating for yourself. You are supposed to be creating for the client, and it's supposed to be working, and it's supposed to be solving a problem. But even though you could still like have something of yours in that equation, and it was really cool to see it happen. So yes, I think that's what I liked about advertising, like to be in contact with great directors, great photographers, great illustrators, and someone else was paying someone else was paying them and me for us to do our stuff. That was the good part, and I do think that there was a period in the 2000s where advertising flirted, like the internet started changing things, and one way that many brands thought at the time that the way now was going to be like what someone made the term advertainment, where they were advertising was supposed to be like entertainment. Like, for example, one of the first ones in the year 2000 and something, BMW, instead of doing like a normal campaign, they just hired the best directors, and they did short films. Like Guy Ritchie was one, like some really talented, like John Woo, like great directors. They did short movies, and they had like the only request was to have the car in the short story, and then those short films were available on the internet. What I'm just trying to say, that was like a possibility in that time that advertising would be even like funnier or more entertaining than it was, and it would be a lot less like silly. But then like that I think didn't happen, or when everything changed, like with social media, with with data analysis, with like social platforms, everything changed, and I think it's probably more effective for the client, but I think it's less in general. It's less creative or less entertaining.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned one of the aspects of advertising that you love is that people will pay you to kind of realize this big idea that you have, and while also trying to inject a bit of yourself into that idea. How do you manage that if it's a the client's kind of brand and their concept? Was it difficult for you to inject your own vision into it?
No, because most of those, like, there's kind of like a formula for all of those advertising. And it's two things, like either you're telling a story or a joke or both. So you're creating, like, it's a story, you're creating characters, and you're creating this drama or something that is a tension and how to solve usually the problem. The product will help solving this situation, but you're creating stories and creating characters or jokes, like just thinking about, so it's your kind of humor, the humor that you like, the joke that you would laugh. So I think that's how ended up like injecting your own. And then like some like, for example, you can go even on another level, like on the treatments. If it's a TV spot, you have like all these art directions decisions and how what style you want to do things, and how would you suggest like the wardrobe and the location and how to be shot.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to see that side of things. I guess while you were living in New York, I believe that was around the time when you kind of rediscovered your own passion for making your own artwork, right? So what led to you taking art up again? You know, you kind of set it aside, and back in your teenage years, what led to you kind of reinvesting in your own personal creative pursuit?
Yes, it has like a couple of milestones, my art career in the beginning, that I can see now where they happen and the importance or relevance of each of those. I think the first one was, I was in Peru. I was at an advertising agency. I had some bosses that I really liked, and they were good, and they quit the agency that I was at. And me and in advertising, you always work with a partner, like copywriter and art director. Both of us were supposed to kind of like take more or less the space of the people who left. But I remember asking for a raise, and they didn't want to give me a raise. Mm-hmm. So I quit, even though, like, usually don't quit without having a future job aligned. But I think that was one of a couple, like, I quit even though I had nothing to do. I didn't thought it was fair. I didn't want to take that much responsibility without a raise. So I quit. And then after I quit, I thought I thought to myself, I cannot be just every day just playing PlayStation video games. I have to do something. And I thought, okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to draw every day. Like I went to like art materials like around the corner. I just got like a book and papers and some pens, and I just started like, so I had kind of like the discipline that I auto-imposed a task to draw a little bit every day. I had to do some creative like exercise while I was thinking about and trying to get a new job. But this creative exercise, I didn't pick or choose to be advertising agency related. I just picked drawing. And it was funny because I can see my voice even like there, because the things that I started drawing was some kind of trash, like a receipt, like a supermarket receipt crumpled, and that's what I wanted to draw. Or like cookies that I had, like I had the cookies and I had just the cookie package just like torn and open. That's what I want to. So that was the first part, like having this time in my hands, my discipline to have like a creative exercise, which was drawing. That was the first part. Then I moved to New York, and that's when the second part of it happened, was that I was like some days like getting super stressed. Like there was like a lot of work. It was good. And I don't know how much is the city of the advertising agency that I was, but it was stressful, and it was like so I started to feel the need of like I need to do something that helps me relax, and that's when I went. That's the second part, when I started like, okay, let's go back to that exercise of drawing. And so when I started, first phase in Peru was just like I was just doing like with a fine pen. Just like doing fine pen, black drawings on fine pen. Then when I was in New York and I started this other part, I felt the desire to, let me try adding some colors in it. So I would draw with a fine pen. I had like no idea. I never like researched much, or as you already know, I never studied art. So I just say, how can I add color in a very simple way? And I went to like an art store, and I just saw the watercolor sets. They were like super small, and I think, and I started to think to myself like, watercolor like super small. It's easy to clean. I don't need an easel. I can just have my whole studio. My apartment in New York was like the tiniest you can imagine, and I thought I can have my whole studio fit in one drawer, because all I need is just one block of paper, just pens, and then the color set that is really small, like the ones that has like 12 tiles of colors for more or less, and some brushes, and it's easy to clean. I just pull the drawer, do something, put it on again. But at the same time, I didn't like watercolor. I didn't like what I thought watercolor was. I remember seeing like watercolor every time that I thought, before I paint, like I'm talking 10 or more years ago, 10, 12, 13 years ago, before I started doing my own, I thought that, I don't know, you could only paint, the only thing you would be able to do with watercolor was like those dreamy, ethereal scenes. That's how like everything you say watercolor, that's what comes to my mind, like those foggy, ethereal, dream like scenes, like it's like, for example, a city raining and there's a reflection, or something like a landscape, like a marine landscape, and everything is like washed, and I wasn't too much into that, like visually, that didn't attract me. So I had my kind of like a rejection to the media by this preconceived notion of what it was. But anyways, how useful and how easy it was to use was enough for me, and that's how so wrapping the answer is, in New York I felt the need to de-stress, and I had already started like doing some drawing practice in Peru. I was still doing this drawing practice in fine pen. I started adding colors, and I chose watercolor just because it was easy in regards to space and cleaning, even though I didn't like what I remember about it.
How did you teach yourself how to use watercolor in the way that you use today? I mean, obviously you had this preconceived notion of what watercolor was to you at that point. How did you change that mindset and learn it and to use it in the way that you use it today?
It was like kind of like a progression. I think I'm very curious, and I always go back to this, like this self-taught versus educated paths. They both have like advantages and disadvantages. I am sure that by not being taught, I am missing something. That like probably there are some things that I do in a complicated or hard way that maybe someone could have taught me to do it in a very easy way. But on the other hand, nobody ever told me that's the correct way to paint and that's the wrong way to paint. So I think I experimented a lot. And in watercolor, that experimentation, I think watercolor is very flexible. I don't know much about other mediums. I know a little bit of acrylic, but I think watercolor is more flexible. Meaning, just to say one element, the amount of water, like you have a ratio from like, usually the pigment is solid. So either is those solid blocks, or it just comes from a tube in a very, very thick way. So you have to dilute it with water. Just this diluting step, you can do it like in so many different ways, meaning that you can dilute with a lot of water or just a drop of water. And between those two things, you have like a whole range of proportions, and they react super differently. Not only that, but I don't know, like if you mix them, like if you are using like the really watery version, and you put some, like you do a part in the paper, and then you get another color and you put next to it, you can also like let them blend them by themselves, which would create a very organic texture, which I like and I do. Or I don't know, you could just mix them all the way. And watercolor is very transparent, and by being very transparent, it allows you to work in layers a lot, like you go layer by layer by layer, darkening. It has one very big disadvantage. Well, it is as a first sight is it's a big disadvantage, which is you cannot go back. You cannot go back, and you cannot go like clear on top of, or you cannot go lighter on top of dark. Like it doesn't work because of the transparency that I mentioned to you. So if you have like a darker color and you try putting a transparent lighter one, doesn't affect almost anything. So you cannot go back. So I going back to your question, I learn by experimenting a lot, and then I think kind of like almost in a natural selection process, I kept, like, for example, I painted something and I will keep everything that I liked about it, and I will discard everything that I didn't like about it, and I will add something new. And by this process, like I went refining my style until like I found it. And also, like, again, all this process, not conscious, like I realized later what I was doing and how it was happening. The funny thing that I just told you about, like the voice or the theme, it has always been there since like the drawings in Peru. I was when I started doing those watercolors in New York, they were like also trash and things that I like related. And so, yes, the voice was already there, and the technique developed naturally in this process that I mentioned to you.
Through like iterative experimentation. That's super interesting. How did you you were working as a high-profile advertising person for so long while you were discovering your own artistic process. How did you make that time? Like, was that hard to make that time to kind of do all these iterations and explorations that you were doing, 10 to 13 years ago, however long ago it was?
So yeah. Going back to the artist path phases, that is almost like the third phase was Tampa. When I moved from New York to Tampa, I got another job in Tampa, and at Tampa I had something that I didn't have in New York, which was a space. So in Tampa we got like a bigger place. It's not huge, but it was a lot bigger than the New York place. And I remember that near the entrance there was like an area that it wasn't like a bedroom, but it was a useful area, like a space. And that was the first time that I had a studio, Tampa. So so in Tampa, I didn't have like the drawer studio. I could have like a table that is forever there, all materials there. So that's when I decided, okay, so until then, watercolor was for the time, it was a tool to help me de-stress, unstress, or relieve stress. From now on, from Tampa on, it's going to be something that I'm going to do more professionally, or more, I'm going to be more disciplined. So that's when I finally have a studio. It's when I set up and I started like okay, I'm going to do this every day, and sometimes I even like used a stopwatch. Oh, wow. I will have a stopwatch, and I would do at least 1 hour, maybe more, but at least 1 hour. So I would come from home, I would be with my kids, and then later, most of the time when they go to sleep, which shouldn't be super late, I would go down to my studio table, and I would just practice for at least 1 hour. And I started painting. By that time, I wasn't showing anywhere, and I didn't like it. But the work started getting like more cohesive. My technique starting to get better. So that was the third phase of the career path.
And while that you were in that phase of kind of figuring your own style out, developing your craft. You have your studio now, and you're making time to actually work on your own ideas. Were you thinking in terms of showing your art? Like, is that something that you were hoping or aiming to achieve at some point, to show them in a gallery setting?
Yes. So even though all this art practice since the beginning until today, if you ask me why do I do it, is because it gives me pleasure. That's the reason I do it, because it's good for me, because it satisfies my creativity, because it makes me happy, because creating those stories are satisfying to me. So that's the reason that selling or showing, even though are super important, and even though are satisfaction and a fulfillment in a way, they come second on this order. But yeah, so you asked me if I had plans to, and yes. So when I started in Tampa, like to be more professional, and I was going to do it like every day, I started thinking about the next step that would be showing. So I think I started researching about how do you do that, and I probably read a couple of books of how artists do, and I or on the internet researching, and I discovered the open call shows. So that's what I started doing. Like I would just Google for galleries that would receive submissions for open call shows, and I started submitting. And slowly started getting accepted to some of those like smaller galleries, and it's even like, for example, some even in Tampa, which is not like, you cannot compare the art market in Tampa than the one in Los Angeles,
right?
Even though they do have like a great gallery there, which I think it's almost like it was. After I left, I think it got, I don't know if they were open when I was there, which is Cass Contemporary. I know that they show like Tristan Eaton, for example. So I did like open calls. I started getting on some of those, not necessarily the biggest galleries or the most like well known, but in a way it was some kind of like validation. Now, I stayed in Tampa for just 2 years, and then I moved here to LA, which I think I consider still like the same part of the same phase in two cities, because then I had my studio at the garage. I was doing everything that I was doing in Tampa, but at the garage, and I was still doing the open calls. And I think the first one that it was almost like a point there was when I got into a group show that it was small works from the gallery was Arch Enemy Gallery, and it was the first time that I was on a group show that had artists that I liked and knew amongst. So that was like one thing. I say, oh, now I'm showing with those guys, and I like those guys. So it was the first time that I thought it was like a new level. Like
yeah. And so once you moved out to LA, were you getting involved in the art community? Like, were you going out to art shows and openings and participating in the larger art community there?
Yes, I was going to art shows. I used to. It's curious because I'm showing with ThinkSpace, and probably ThinkSpace was the gallery that I went to openings the most. Even though I'm kind of shy, and I was more then when I didn't know anybody. So I used to go to many ThinkSpace openings, but even though I usually didn't speak to, I don't know, I was still like afraid of the artists. Nowadays I know how it feels when you are showing, and I know that it's fun and nice to talk to people who are looking at your work. So now that I have been both sides, I am a lot more inclined to go and bother the artists and talk to them. But when I didn't, I didn't approach them. I didn't talk to them.
You mentioned ThinkSpace, and I think your first solo with them was in 2017, a couple years after you first started showing it in group shows. Obviously, you've had several solos with them since. How did you originally connect with Andrew, Sean, LC, and the folks at ThinkSpace?
Yes. So after the group shows, I had my first show that it wasn't like a solo show, but it was a show. It was a three person show that it was curious how it happened because it was very random. So I was still working. I am still working, but at that time we were at the advertising agency office, and there was a guy that I overheard him talking about his opening a gallery. I didn't knew him very much at the time, but I just heard he was talking to someone that is he was opening a gallery, and then I approached him and say, "Hey, I've just heard that you." We weren't friends at the moment. I just heard you were talking about your opening a gallery. Can I show you my stuff? Then I sent him my what I had, and yeah, he liked. His name is Rick, and he has a gallery now. He has a gallery in Inglewood, which is called Residency. So his first show, his opening show, the one where he inaugurated the gallery, it was me and two more people. But I only had like three big pieces, but only three. His gallery, like the space wasn't like super big. So I think I don't remember for 3 or 4 people this first show, but it wasn't called a group show. It was like all of us, we had like multiple pieces, and I had 3 big pieces of mine there. And then someone saw Badir. He has an Instagram account where he's kind of like a curator or a critic. He saw those pieces at the Inglewood Gallery, which was his first show, and he sent them to Andrew.
Oh, nice.
And then Andrew contacted me on Instagram, and it was funny because when I saw his Instagram message, it wasn't the first time that he was messaging me. It was like, I think the first message that I saw, it was, "Hey, I have been emailing you and you didn't reply," because I didn't saw it. I don't know if it was like the second or but I was lucky enough that he gave me more than one try.
Nice.
And yes, and that's like phase 4, like getting like ThinkSpace to invite me to show something. It is like this new, again, another different level. And yes, I started showing them in 2017. At that time, they used to have, like, in the previous space, they had like the main gallery, they had the project room, and then they had the room at the back, which is the office, which sometimes they used to do a show there, or sometimes they would just put like stuff that they have in, how do you say? They have it in
inventory.
Inventory, yeah. But whenever they wanted, they would do like a real show there, and I my first one was there.
Nice, very cool. No, that's awesome. So, like, looking back over these 4 phases that you described. Do you regret not embracing your personal art sooner? Like, you were working for 20-something years before you finally made that step. Do you regret not jumping in sooner?
No, I don't. Because I wouldn't be like, if I started like 20 or 30 years ago, I would be painting something differently. I would have, the path would be different and my art would be different. So I don't know if it would be better or worse, or more interesting or less interesting, but for sure I can say that it wouldn't be this one. This one is the result of who I am today, and who I am today is the person who went through this path and all those things. So the art that I'm doing is like intrinsically connected to who I am and the experience that I have had. So if I dream or imagine a different path, it's going to lead to a different art. So we can do this imagination to see if it would be better or worse. But for sure, I think we can say for sure that it wouldn't be the same. So I don't regret, because I like this one, and I don't have too much of this. What if it? So I'm happy with this one, and it's fine.
Very cool. That's a very healthy way to look at it. It's bad to live in thinking about what ifs too much. So diving into the themes, you talked a little bit about the themes that your work has embodied throughout the entire. I mean, even back when you were drawing just pen on paper, your focus has largely been waste, overconsumption, social inequality, the wealth gap, these very kind of rich social issues that you create commentary about. I guess, why do you think that these really important social issues have become such a big focus for you?
Yes, yes. Social inequality, I think, is the one thing that bothers me the most as a person. As I told you in the beginning of our talk, from an early age, I had the opportunity to be close to both extremes in society. Probably society in Brazil and São Paulo, it's even more, well, at least the part that I saw, the gap was even bigger than in here. Like the poor and the rich, the gap is even larger than here, probably. But United States is making an effort to make this gap big again.
Right.
So, and I think like I'm not very well. I don't know if I would say that I'm not very optimistic of things. How I think there is a decline, and I think there is a consensus that the middle class is suffering. The middle class is getting poorer. The middle class, like everything is harder. Like all the time. Like we hear everybody that how hard it is to buy a house nowadays. How hard it is to pay for education nowadays. How hard it is to pay for health nowadays. It's not correct, and it's not healthy, it's not fair. And I think that either it's going to get as bad to a point that is going to happen some kind of revolution, or we fix it before. But I think it's impossible to be like that. Like, so it really, like, personally, it really bothers me and really worries me. But I think that something is going to happen. Like, the thing, I do believe that it's getting worse very fast, and one of those things may happen, like either like a collapse and then a rebuild, or a rebuild before a collapse.
I mean, that's part of the problem, though. Like, all the people in power that benefit from the way that the system is set up are preventing you from changing it, right? They don't want you to change the wheels on the car while they're driving it, right?
Yes, but in a way, like, I don't know if it's like that's now being optimistic. If you see how younger people vote, I think they are voting more towards like a fix before a collapse. But yes,
I'm hopeful. I mean, that's the silver lining in all of this, is that the next generation are definitely more are moving in the right direction, as far as I can tell. Gen Z, I think, gives a lot of people hope, not only in their activism and their willingness to go out and speak their truth, but their ability to kind of organize and realize that truth.
Yeah, and they have to, because they are getting like a really bad deal.
I know, right? Like, we're giving them this gift of garbage, like this late stage capitalism that has just So I don't know. I mean, I think it could fall either way. I fear that if it does not fix itself before there's this larger revolution, like, it has to get really bad to the point where people are willing to stand up and do something about it, because there's this, like, Gen X, millennials, older millennials, there's this sense of apathy. Like, what do I do? What do we even do? So, I mean, your art as a platform, do you like using your art as a way of kind of communicating these critical dialogues? Because do you feel that art can make an impact in that way?
Yes. I like that it provokes that. I like that. Well, to begin, I like that it's honest, being that is a representation of myself. I'm not pretending to like something or do something. It's a true and honest representation of what I am and what I think. So I'm happy that it's sincere art in this way. I am happy that is in a way provocative, or that is like trying to push something, that is trying to make people talk about something, that is trying to, in a way, I don't know how effective it is, and I cannot, but that's the best I can do right now, is just to try and create and steer the conversation towards this. yeah, and I'm happy that some other people feel the same, and but with the art we can connect and talk to each other because they see my art and they see, oh, I feel the same, and I understand what you are saying, what you're doing, and I think similarly. So yes, I am happy that I have this, and I don't know, injustice is a very it's a very powerful. So I feel the injustice a lot, and I like to be in the side that is like against this very powerful. Like I don't mind being in the weaker side, on the weaker team, or being the underdog. Like I just like I know the limit. I'm not saying that I'm changing the world with my art, and I know the limitations of the rich, but. But yes, I like being the like I wouldn't like just accept those things as they are without like fighting.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like you want to be on the right side of history at the end of this. I guess, how do you feel that your many years of experience in commercial advertising has contributed to your work in some way, or I guess informed your narrative?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first thing that I have to say is the irony, right? That everything that we have been just saying, and in a way, I am like part of what's wrong too, like being part of like advertising or the consumerism.
How do you reconcile that? I mean, I was going to ask you that. Like, how do you reconcile that conflict? And have you encountered situations where your corporate clients are misaligned with your values in some way? And how do you resolve that?
No, I don't have. I have never had like an ethical a situation where I would be ethically like in conflict. It didn't happen that I had to work with a client or a brand that it was like really harmful or doing something bad or almost that lying. I never had to. I know that like the brands that I'm working with not like lying, like, so I have not been in this extreme situation, but I know the irony of me working in there, but at the same time it is like I'm doing this because I have to. Like if I don't work there, what am I going to do? Where's the money coming from? Like why? Like I didn't chose to be in a situation where I cannot afford to have my own house, and I cannot afford like if the world was already a little more fair, then maybe I wouldn't be like. That's one of the problems, like people like being dependent on the jobs that they have or needing the money, and sometimes even doing things that could be like a little against some of their beliefs.
Because they need healthcare, right? You need
yes.
that.
Yeah.
You need
what
that
am I going
insurance.
to do? Like yes. Like right now, I can't like with it. Even though I love my art and I would love to do more of it, it's not even close to being enough to the money that I need. Like not even close. And I have a family. I have kids and
right.
paying rent and. So yeah, that's a part of the irony. Then the other part that you asked me about how it informs me. Yes. Okay, like going back to the optimistic of the beautiful side of things is that advertising or is design more specifically have brought us like some really beautiful things have been made, like in packaging, for example, or brands or like. Advertising have been hiring those great and talented professionals who have been able to come up with really beautiful logos, brands, and they are like icons. And forget about it. Like for example, forget that Marlboro is a cigarette that gives you cancer and kills people. Forgetting about that part. You just look at that logo and it's a powerful thing. Like it is a powerful because visually it's powerful, the colors, the simplicity, the shapes, but also they created, there is a lot of things behind Marlboro that is associated with adventure, is associated with masculinity, is associated, there is a lot of values that are associated, and they have been like successful on creating this image behind it. So I can appreciate the design, the beautiful part of the design. I can appreciate and see, look what they have been able to do. They put all those values, all this information is encapsulated into this very simple shape. And even though, again, like it is like a evil thing, the product, the cigarette, the consequences, but I still admire the work that it has been done.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Going back to one thing that you were saying about just the necessity of working in a day job in order to pay the bills so that you are able to create your artwork. I think that's interesting, and it's something that's come up on the show a few times, just allowing your art to be more pure, right? You're not burdening your art practice with the responsibility of monetization because you have this other income that pays the bills and gives you healthcare and takes care of your family. You can explore in whatever ways you want with your art practice. Do you feel like that's an important part of this dynamic between day job and art practice?
Yes. Again, like those two situations, like having the art as a side thing without the responsibility, or having it as your main income, they both have pros and cons. But yes, I agree with you. That is one of the great things about my art being a side thing and not the main one, is because it doesn't have this burden, doesn't have this responsibility of making money. And even though I could be like, I could try really hard to not let the audience or the public or expectations influence me. But at the point that I'm depending on sales and I see that this sells more than this, I will be like, in a way, I will be always like moving towards what sells more. And that's not very good for the art itself. Like, as you mentioned, the more pure, the purest form, the freest form is the one that is not like limited or decided by sales. And so yes, I agree with you that that's the good side of my art not having this responsibility, is that it's more free, more creative, more independent.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's dive into your process a little bit. So like, what does your ideation process usually look like? Are you drawing daily to come up with your ideas? Do you have brainstorm activities? How do you usually come up with your ideas for a piece?
Yeah, again, like going back to the self-taught and learned in school, my process, I think that is not very conventional. I don't have like sketches. I'm not drawing. Sometimes I have like ideas. And most of the time, I just doing a post-it, and you could say that this post-it has more the function of recording this idea for me to not forget about it than as a study. So I'm not studying anything on the post-it. I'm just recording. Oh, I had this idea where the main part of this is going, like, usually starts like that. Usually is like there is something that I want to talk about it or use it, an element. For example, I want to use this element that is going back to the magazines and the Playboys, and is a Playboy centerfold. So I want to use it in this way. And so the post-it is just the registration of the idea. Then later on, and that's why I think it's not very conventional, my process, is I have been using 3D software.
Oh, wow.
To do the compositions. So I start like adding the elements, creating the elements. Like I have a kind of a vocabulary of my elements that I have been using, that I like those elements. And it's funny because I think even though it's painting, I think my work is very sculptural, meaning that like it is very like three-dimensional. I don't know if it's because I don't know if the 3D is the chicken or the egg. I don't know if they are three-dimensional because I create them in 3D, what I'm creating in 3D because I had the vision in my head, and 3D is the best way. So going back, I go to the 3D software and I start like playing with the composition, adding the elements. It's a very, very long process most of the time because I'm adding many elements, and those like I try to find like a balanced and harmonious way to add all those things, and it's a lot of like moving a little bit to here, and then it triggers a lot of other movements, like finding the position of all the elements is very laborious. It takes a lot of time to find the correct position for all of those. Also, like I find like in the end it's going to be a 2D painting, so I find like an angle where I want to do it, and so I do a lot of the 3D. Next step, I move to Photoshop, where I add some of like photographic references. For example, if I get like a crumpled beer can, I take a picture and I put it on the composition. That part goes on Photoshop. Also on Photoshop, if I have like a piece of a billboard, that's where I'm adding this piece of the like the Marlboro logo sign. That's on Photoshop is where I'm pasting it in the correct perspective. So all of those those happen there in the computer. The composition on the 3D software, the adding the final touches on Photoshop. But that's the computer part. On the computer part, there are three things that doesn't happen at all in the computer, which are colors. Nothing has everything is gray in my computer part.
Even in Photoshop?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them have colors because if I get the logo from the internet and I put it, I still remain in colors. But I'm not intentionally like picking colors. So they have no colors like the overall elements. There is no lighting. I don't use the lighting of the 3D software. To be honest, I don't even know how to place the light. Again, like the 3D software, I just learned by doing, and so I did not learn, and I wasn't very interested in placing light and shadow on the 3D software. I don't know how to, so I don't get that from the 3D, and I don't get textures. So all of those three things that are super important in my work, they only happen in the paper, which is color, texture, and lighting. So that's more or less the process.
The things that aren't created in the photo composition or in the computer composition, the digital composition, whether it be the 3D or the Photoshop portion of your process, the textures, the color, the lighting, how do you figure those things out? Do you just do it as you're painting, or do you have a phase where you're doing color studies before you do the final painting? No,
I do it on the paper. I think, I don't know, it's hard to say. Like those things are hard to say compared to other people because you can never be inside other people's head. But I think I can look at, I have like, for example, I started with something and I have like, I don't know, one element, and I have the second one where let's say that the second element can be any color. For example, it's a plastic crate. I know that there's a plastic crate. I have the plastic crate on my composition, but now that it's on the paper, I can pick any color that I want for the plastic crate. And I think I am able to look at it, and in my head, I can see it in different colors, and I can pick the one that I like the most. That's the part that I cannot like say. I don't know if how it's for other people, if they can. I think I can like see them, how they would look in different colors, and I test them in my head, and I make a decision.
Interesting. Yeah, because like you said, the textures and colors are so like crucial to what you do. I mean, it's a really integral part of your artwork. So it's interesting that aspect is kind of figured out as you paint.
Yes, and the texture is even more like random because as like we've talked or spoke when I was talking about the watercolor as a technique, texture is even more like random because I intentionally do it in a way that it creates its own texture. At least in the first layers, I just sometimes I just throw the colors and I just let them dry, and then they create like different like organic textures. So yes, that like, for example, I can say that I have a little control on the colors that I'm picking for the elements, but in this texture part is one that I have kind of less control. So where I'm looking for a little bit of randomness that later I will then reinforce and make some of those textures pop even more. But yes, yeah, the texture, the color, and the light happens in the paper, and that's when, like, again, complementing and using one of other of your questions, how the advertising influences me, is that on those 20-30 years, even though I wasn't painting, I have done like thousands of Photoshop retouching. So in advertising, when I had to present an idea for a print idea, for example, what we used to do is just we get like 2, 3, 4, 5 images from Google, and you make one image to show what your idea is. And then you have to match color, you have to match light, because these come from different sources, and you have to tweak them so the perspective matches, the light matches, the saturation on the color matches. So I am used to, even though I'm not painting, I am used to thinking about light and shadow and saturation and values and perspective from my advertising experience.
Interesting. No, that's fascinating that you're able to repurpose those skills in that way. We talked earlier about the pros and cons of watercolor. I guess are there other mediums that you may want to explore someday that you haven't had an opportunity to?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm super curious. Even if I don't plan on using or painting or developing these other techniques, I would like to try. I, for example, have never tried oil. I have heard about it. Some things, like, for example, the fact that it takes a long time to dry isn't very attractive.
Right.
But the fact that you can work with layers, it is attractive to me. There is one thing that is like this possibility of adding lighter colors on top of darker ones would be like a very useful thing. But so yes, I am curious with many other techniques and mediums, even though maybe just for fun, but also the one that I want to try soon is some kind of like mini sculptures. Like I don't know if it's like a blend of 3D printing or some cast making, but I'm really interested in getting some of my paintings and making them as mini sculptures. Nice. So I think that's the, even though I'm curious about everything, that's the one that I'm focusing on the short term. I want to do as like, and whenever I have time to study those and learn by doing, to get some of my paintings and bringing them into real world, but in a small scale, like not the real scale, just as mini sculptures. And again, yeah, maybe they are done by 3D printing, maybe they are done by casting, a composition.
Interesting. I mean, the way that you described your process, it seems like a natural extension of that because you're already thinking in 3 dimensions. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What's been your main focus this year, and what does the rest of 2023 look like for you?
Yes, I have a solo show at ThinkSpace at mid 2024. I don't remember right now if it's June or July, but it's the middle of 2024. I'm very excited about it. Like it's at the new space, and it is kind of challenging because it's the biggest room that I have ever worked with them. It's not their main room. Is the on ThinkSpace. If you have ever been to ThinkSpace, there are 2 buildings. One of the buildings has a main gallery that is huge, that it will take 4 years for me to fill. Then there is the second building in the lower part. They call it like the space number 3. But and it's a big, considerable area with many walls. We are like a little bit like I have more or less 1 year to work. I'm super excited. I like that space a lot. I have this challenge or motivation to fill it. but I think yes, I can manage to do it. And sometimes I have some works or some ideas that they do work well as a series, so that helps me also like to spread. Like for example, get one idea and make 3-4 variations of it. But they are still interesting, and they still like are interesting to see as a group. I don't feel that they are repetitions. They don't feel like repetitions. They feel like more explorations of the same theme. But in a way, that also helps me like with filling the walls and putting the show.
So have you started, I mean, it's a little bit more than a year out. Have you already started thinking about like a theme for the show or a title? Has that stuff started to materialize, or do you usually do that later in your process?
Let me just add one. I don't know, you can edit this part however you want, but let me just add that I also have like 2 group shows for 2023, which is one show is a group show that Scott Lisfield that you have interviewed. He's having a very interesting thing that is he's having a solo show, and then next to it like a group show that he is curating.
Nice, very cool.
So yes, I'm setting one piece for this show, and I'm interested. I like his work. I like him. I have already the composition done. It's a small painting, but I'll have like a astronaut helmet on the composition, just the helmet.
It's a nice homage to Scott.
Yeah. I think it's nice, like to play with like our work they share some stuff with like the brands and this post-apocalyptic feel. So we have some elements in common. I like his work, and I'm honored to be in the group show that he's curating. And I think this element of just the helmet without the astronaut, it is a nice nudge to the whole thing. The other group show that I am also in and that I'm proud of it is the High Fructose show, and it's going to happen I think in second semester 23. I'm also excited for this one. Yes, being featured on the magazine was something that I really wanted, and I'm really proud that it happened last year. Okay, so going back to your question about what was the question?
Mainly, like, have you already started thinking about the themes or the title for the show? I mean, since it is a year out, have you already started, manifesting some of that?
It is curious because I don't do much themes for shows. I feel that all of my work is similar. Like from all of the shows, like I probably have had like 3 or 4 shows at ThinkSpace. But I feel that if you take some pieces from one show and you put in the other, and you could just like randomly pick pieces from all of the shows, and I think they would still more or less look the same. So I don't think that my shows have like they are too like distinct in themes. I think they are more or less the same. Yes, I do think that from time to time I get obsessed with some small things, and I do and use them more often. From like I can see that I have this, I don't know, the shopping cart, and I have used shopping cart a lot, and then I move to some other element and I use them a lot because I'm excited and I want to. But I wouldn't call this a theme. So no, I don't think of a theme. I'm just doing my stuff, like, and it is whatever I'm focused on right now. About a name. I'm thinking I had one name in mind that let's see if it stays, but I haven't like written like exactly how it is, but it's what I'm feeling, and it is something like Reagan killed the middle class or something like this, or how Reagan killed the middle class, which is I just again like just to add another element of provocation and. It is connected to my work, and I do believe the middle class has been killed, and I do believe that Reaganomics.
I mean, he's turned out to be one of the largest villains in all of history.
Yes, because everything that he did, like it went bad for the middle class. It was good, like these deregulations, this free market, this liberalism in the economy, only increased the gap even more. Like and. So I'm inclined to create a title that points in this direction and blaming Reagan for the end or the decline of the middle class.
Very cool. Awesome. I mean, I love the idea. I guess in addition to, you mentioned the group show that you have with Scott, you have the show with High Fructose later this year, and then your solo next year. Are there any other things coming up this year that you'd want to put on people's radar? Print releases, events, anything like that?
No. Those are just things that I have on calendar. The prints, I'm doing the prints on my own. And I have that part of the business so organized as in to have like dates for release. Is more or less when I feel like. When I have an idea or I want to do a print series, I just announce it on Instagram.
All right. Well, yeah. Tell people where they can find you online so that they can follow you and, for when you do release things.
Yes. My Instagram is Alvaro, ALVARO _Naddeo, NADDEO.
All right. Awesome. So then last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Yes, let me. I know that you were going to ask, and I would like to suggest one artist that I like his work. That I don't know him personally. I have never met him or spoke to him, but his name is I don't know how to pronounce it. Kadir Nelson. I discovered his work in some New Yorker magazine covers, and I don't know why, but I see some modern Norman Rockwell in his work of how he portrays society today. But obviously it is a modern way, and it's his own style, his own way, which is very different with his particular style, his use of colors. So yes, I would be, as a listener of your podcast, there's someone that I'm curious to know more about it.
Awesome. Wonderful. Great suggestion. I'll add his name to the show notes. So Alvaro, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. As I told you, like I'm a listener of your show, and I love it. And I'm really honored, and I'm glad that you invited me. And yes, it was a fun time.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Alvaro. This is going to sound really weird, but I always appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about the way in which our failed economic system is in the process of imploding on itself. It's not something that often comes up on a show about artists and their lives, but that's exactly what Alvaro's work has always been about, whether he realized it at first or not. And it was interesting to know that a lot of that messaging was inspired by things that he's been observing since as far back as his childhood, while he was seeing this deep divide between the lives of the people on the quote-unquote other side of the tracks and his own middle-class experience. And then later, the divide between that same middle-class way of life and the super wealthy that he lived around in his teenage years. Seeing firsthand how vast and ever-growing that economic inequality is. And then seeing throughout his life later how huge it is now. And asking the question, do we get to a point in this country where people become so fed up with the way things have become that they end up revolting? Or do we manage to turn things around before they get that bad? It feels like we're in the throes of, late stage capitalism evolving into a sort of neo-feudalism. How can we as individuals have any hope of making a difference there? Alvaro's chosen to do that through his art. It was also interesting how he highlighted the irony of his work, speaking out about these social problems while also working for a commercial advertising agency, some of which, some would see contributes to the very problems that he's speaking against. But at the end of the day, like he and a few other of the guests that I've had on have said, sometimes it's necessary to fund your life with a day job so that you can remove that pressure from your art practice. freeing them to explore new directions that they may not have been able to or felt able to if their art was financially supporting them and their families. That's definitely an important consideration and something to think about. It sounds like there are plenty of ways to engage with Alvaro's work in the coming months. Keep an eye out for that group show that Scott Listfield is curating, which Alvaro is going to have a piece in, and in a way paying homage to Scott. And then later in the year, he'll be participating in a group show put on by High Fructose. And then mark your calendars for mid-2024. I believe it's going to be at the end of June. He'll have his next solo show at ThinkSpace. He's still working on the title for it, but it may involve the destructive impact that Ronald Reagan has had on the middle class. Be sure to follow Alvaro's Instagram to keep up with all these new shows. So thanks again to Alvaro for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.